The sky was still dark when the first shadows moved along the river, silent and determined. In the distance, Polish soldiers waited, knowing that soon the night would explode with fire and death. They were few, their supplies running thin, but their resolve was stronger than steel. What followed was not just a battle, but a stand so fierce that even the enemy would remember it with awe. A fight where surrender was never an option, and where every bullet carried the weight of a nation's pride. After fighting without rest for 3 days, the Polish soldiers defending the area of Wisner were nearly at the end of their strength. German combat engineers, backed by the thunder of artillery and the relentless advance of tanks, had steadily torn apart the Polish defensive line. One stronghold after another fell under the crushing assault, leaving only 2 bunkers still standing. Inside these bunkers, the last Polish defenders gripped their rifles tightly, surrounded by thick walls of concrete, the choking haze of smoke, and the endless cries of their wounded comrades. Their world had shrunk to a grim fortress of dust and despair. Yet, against all odds, these 700 Polish soldiers had managed to hold off the might of 40,000 German troops for almost 3 full days. Their resistance was admirable, but time was no longer on their side. Many of their fellow soldiers had already been killed, while others, injured or exhausted, were captured and dragged away as prisoners of war. The remaining men counted their last bullets, knowing their supplies would soon run out. Then came a grim message. Through the smoke and destruction, the voice of General Heinz Guderian, commander of the German forces, was heard. Carried by loudspeakers or radio, his warning was clear and merciless. Surrender immediately, or every Polish prisoner taken by the Germans would be executed without mercy. Inside the bunker, silence followed his words. The men looked at each other, their faces pale but determined. A sudden explosion shook the bunker walls again, making the ground tremble as dust poured from the ceiling. The Polish soldiers turned their eyes to their commander, Wladyslaw Raginis, who stood with a straight back, even as everything around him seemed to collapse. Despite the hopeless situation, he showed no sign of giving up. The Germans waited outside, but Raginis refused to surrender. As long as he was breathing, he would not allow Poland to fall without resistance. A few months earlier, in the summer of 1939, with the winds of war blowing across Europe, Poland hurried to build up its defenses around Wisner. The village was located in northeastern Poland, near the narrow Narew River. It was a quiet and modest place, known for its old trade paths and medieval history, a region of farmers and small settlements. But this peace would not last. By then, Hitler's Germany had already taken Austria and destroyed Czechoslovakia. With the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Germany and the Soviet Union, the fate of Poland was sealed. The agreement secretly divided Poland between the two powers, making a German invasion inevitable. Wisner's position made it an important defensive point because it lay near key river crossings that could lead directly to Warsaw, the Polish capital. To protect these routes, a defensive line stretching about 9 kilometers was set up between Kaziry and Grady Wood, guarding the Narew and Bieber rivers. This line was meant to protect the southern Polish forces and block one of the main roads the Germans could use to reach Warsaw. The defense of this area was entrusted to the independent operational group Narew, a special Polish army group tasked with defending northern Poland. The location of Wisner was carefully chosen because it stood on higher ground, offering a wide view over the flat and marshy valleys below. This made it easier to spot and prepare against any advancing enemy. Construction of the fortifications began in June 1939, just months before the German invasion. Out of 60 planned bunkers, only 16 were fully completed by September when the war began. Some of these bunkers were made of thick concrete and reinforced with steel domes designed to house machine guns and anti-tank weapons. Others were more quickly built, using sandbags for protection. The defenders also dug trenches, set up barbed wire, and planted landmines to slow down any enemy approach. Even though not everything was finished, the Polish soldiers had built a solid defensive line that could endure heavy attacks. The officer in command of these defenses was Captain Wladyslaw Raginis, a man from a landowning family who had previously served in the Border Protection Corps, a unit trained to defend Poland's frontiers. His experience in military policing and border security made him a suitable leader for this difficult task. He joined the independent operational group, Narew, in early 1939 and by summer was stationed at Osawik Fortress, near the border with East Prussia. Eventually, he was chosen to lead the defense of Wisner. He commanded around 900 infantry soldiers, equipped with 6 76mm field guns, 42 machine guns, and only 2 anti-tank rifles. None of them knew that soon they would face a German force, so overwhelming that their battle would be remembered for generations. Like the ancient Spartans, who held off thousands of Persian warriors at Thermopylae, on the morning of September 7, 1939, the village of Wisner was quiet. But as the day progressed, the calm was broken by a distant sound that caught the attention of the Polish soldiers manning the pillboxes. It began as a low rumble, almost like a faraway storm, but grew louder and more distinct. The German tanks were coming. The advancing forces were led by General Heinz Guderian of the 19th Panzer Corps, a key architect of the Blitzkrieg, a fast and aggressive military strategy that used speed and surprise to overwhelm the enemy. Guderian led a massive army of 42,000 soldiers, supported by 350 tanks, 108 howitzers, 58 field artillery pieces, 195 anti-tank guns, 108 mortars, 188 grenade launchers, 28 heavy machine guns, and nearly 700 light machine guns. On the outskirts of Wisner, a small unit of Polish cavalry stood watch. These horsemen, armed only with light rifles, were the first to spot the German armored columns emerging from the forests and fields. Moving steadily toward the Narew River, the cavalryman knew they had no chance against such a powerful enemy force. Without hesitation, they retreated across the river, sending urgent messages to their main forces. The warning was clear. The Germans had arrived, and the battle for Wisner had begun. The Germans wasted no time, capturing the village swiftly, and pushing forward to the river crossings. As their tanks neared the bridge, a group of Polish engineers lay hidden near the water, their eyes fixed on the advancing enemy. Their fingers hovered over detonators, waiting for the right moment. As the tanks came too close, the engineers received their signal. A tremendous explosion followed, tearing apart the bridge with fire and smoke. The German tanks came to a halt, their path blocked by twisted metal and flames. Without waiting to see the aftermath, the Polish engineers slipped away into the surrounding brush, knowing they had delayed the Germans, but aware that the delay would not last forever. The Germans would surely find another route across the river. The next day, on September 8th, the Germans, still cautious, sent reconnaissance planes to fly over the area and observe the Polish positions. From the sky, they could clearly see the defensive arrangements, lines of trenches and bunkers, stretching from Wisner all the way to the village of Kogliki, about 4 miles away. The defenders had prepared as best as they could, knowing full well that a brutal and uneven fight was now unavoidable. The German army still had no clear idea of how many Polish soldiers were holding the defensive line at Wisner, but they were about to find out, and the discovery would come at a heavy price of lives and equipment. The Polish defenders waited, fully aware that the attack was only a matter of time. They checked their weapons one last time, their eyes scanning the distant horizon, each man quietly accepting what was to come. For months, Captain Wladyslaw Raginis and his fellow officers had prepared for this very moment, knowing full well that the odds were stacked against them. They had far fewer men, much less artillery, and very limited supplies compared to the powerful German forces that surrounded them. Yet none of this mattered to them. They had resolved to fight, not because they believed they could win, but because duty and honor demanded it. They would stand their ground, no matter the consequences. As darkness fell, the Germans began to move. Along the muddy banks of the river, German soldiers crept forward, their boots sinking into the soft ground. Every step was taken with caution, as whispers passed between them. Wooden rafts were quietly placed into the water, and the first groups of men climbed aboard, paddling softly to avoid splashes that might betray their presence. The night was still, the only sound being the soft lapping of water against the boats. But hidden in the dark, the Polish sentries watched every movement with sharp eyes, their hands tense around their rifles, waiting for the Germans to come within range. The defenders had been trained to wait for the perfect moment, and when the Germans reached the middle of the river, the silence was shattered. Polish machine guns blazed to life, their tracers streaking through the blackness like streams of fire. The night lit up with sudden bursts of red and gold, as bullets tore through the air and into the boats. The screams of wounded men echoed over the water as some Germans fell into the river, while others tried desperately to find cover or swim back to shore. The surprise attack was brutal and effective, but the Germans were determined to break through. Their officers rallied them on the far side of the river, barking orders and pushing the men to regroup and prepare for another crossing attempt. They would not let the Polish resistance stop them so easily. The next morning, on September 9th, the defenders of Wisner were awakened not by the morning sun, but by the deafening roar of German bombers flying overhead. The sound was overwhelming, the sky filled with the constant hum of engines. The Polish soldiers braced themselves, expecting bombs to rain down and finish what the infantry had started. But instead of explosives, the sky became filled with falling paper. Leaflets, carried by the wind, floated gently to the ground like flakes of snow. When the soldiers picked them up, they saw that the messages claimed most of Poland was already in German hands and that further resistance was useless and only ensured more suffering. Captain Raginis glanced at the leaflets as they drifted past him but paid them no mind. His face hardened with resolve, his eyes showing no sign of surrender. He didn't need a piece of paper to tell him how desperate their situation was. He gathered his men, reminding them that the Germans would have to pay dearly for every piece of land they took. It was a matter of pride and honor now. To stop fighting would be to give up on everything they believed in. The soldiers, inspired by their captain's courage, stood ready to face what came next. As the day went on, the German army intensified its attacks. Artillery fire hammered the Polish positions, each shell landing with devastating force, shaking the ground and sending dirt and debris flying. The constant bombardment was draining the defenders' strength. But still, they did not give up. Eventually, the sheer weight of the German assault began to crack the defenses. By the time evening arrived, German infantry pushed forward again, this time using the thick smoke from their bombardment as cover. Tanks advanced slowly behind them, their massive metal bodies smashing anything in their path. The two bunkers north of the Narew River became the center of attention for the Germans. Surrounded on three sides, the Polish defenders inside fought with everything they had, firing their rifles and machine guns into the enemy ranks. Yet, no matter how bravely they fought, they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The Germans kept coming, their numbers endless, their tanks unstoppable. Eventually, the Polish soldiers inside the bunkers were overwhelmed. The Germans captured the positions and pushed further into the Polish lines, forcing the defenders to pull back to whatever ground they could still hold. As night fell, the Polish defensive line was broken. The soldiers retreated deeper into their remaining positions, though it was clear that the situation was becoming hopeless. The battle entered its second day, but the defenders were now completely surrounded. Every escape route was gone, and there was no help coming. The 135th Infantry Regiment, the reserves who might have provided support, had already been ordered to withdraw to Warsaw days before. The remaining soldiers, who had begun the fight with confidence and determination, now faced a grim reality. The Germans had them trapped, and their relentless advance continued with infantry and tanks moving steadily forward, leaving no place to hide. German artillery pounded what was left of the Polish defenses again and again. The bunkers, trenches, and fortified positions were smashed, crumbling under the constant fire. The defenders were exhausted, their numbers dwindling, their ammunition running low. By the morning of September 10th, the Germans offered a brief ceasefire. They suggested that the Poles collect their dead and consider surrendering. General Heinz Guderian sent a direct warning to the Polish commander, threatening that if they didn't give up, all captured Polish soldiers would be executed. Captain Raginis knew that the moment of choice had arrived. He could continue fighting, but it would only delay the inevitable by a few hours, perhaps less. Or he could surrender, preserving the lives of the men who still stood with him. He looked at his soldiers, battered, weary, yet still brave. They had done all they could, but their bullets were nearly gone, their weapons barely usable, and the enemy's tanks were closing in. With a heavy heart, Raginis gave the order for his men to surrender. They filed out of their bunkers, hands raised, walking toward the German lines. Though they laid down their weapons, they did so with their heads held high, knowing they had fought as hard as anyone could have asked. But Raginis himself refused to surrender. He had made a vow to fight to the death, and he would keep that promise. With one last look at his men, he took a grenade, pulled the pin, and held it tightly beneath his chin. The explosion was his final act of defiance, ensuring that he would not fall into enemy hands alive. It was a gesture of unbreakable spirit, a message that his will could never be conquered. The bunkers were reduced to ruins, and the Polish resistance at Wisner was finally crushed. Yet the defenders had done what no one thought possible. For 3 days, they had held off the might of the German army. Out of the 720 Polish soldiers who fought, only about 70 survived. A staggering loss that showed the overwhelming power they faced. But the Germans paid a price as well, losing at least 10 tanks and many armored vehicles. Official German reports admitted to suffering dozens of casualties. After Wisner fell, the Germans advanced quickly, breaking through Polish lines and capturing important positions. Poland itself would collapse in the following weeks, unable to stop the combined power of the German and Soviet invasions. Yet the stand at Wisner was remembered. It became a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Poland's Thermopylae, where a small band of warriors stood bravely against an unstoppable enemy, not for victory, but for honor, for their country, and for the right to resist even when defeat was certain. In the end, the defense of Wisner was never about victory in the traditional sense. It was a battle fought with the knowledge that defeat was certain. Yet the soldiers stood firm because some things are worth more than survival. Their sacrifice was a message to the world, that even in the face of overwhelming force, the human spirit can remain unbroken. It reminds us that courage is not measured by the chances of winning, but by the refusal to surrender when everything seems lost. This stand, though buried in the ruins of history, continues to echo as a symbol of honor, duty, and the price of defending one's homeland.